In this module, we want to dig into your particular influence style indicator results. I'm going to walk through each of the pages in this particular instrument and then leave it up to you to take some time, study, and read through what the instrument can tell you about your style of influence and how you can become both more effective and rely on a broader range of styles. The first page looks just like this. It'll have your name here, and it'll serve as a cover page. The next page is blank. Page 3 is the influence style indicator workbook. It just describes where does the instrument come from and what's the history. Discovery Learning Inc. is the vendor for this particular instrument. And of course the ISLI model, which we have discussed in Module 2. And what's important here just to remember is that the model relies on two primary orientations to influence. That would be advocating, which is much more of a pull orientation, and uniting, which is, advocating is much more of a push orientating, and uniting, which is much more of a pull orientation, drawing other people towards our ideas, and advocating being pushing our ideas towards them, in some ways onto them. Advocating relies on these two styles, rationalizing and asserting, and it's color-coded blue, and the description, of course, is here. In the uniting orientation, it's color-coded green, and it relies on inspiring and bridging. Negotiation spans between the two and has its own color, yellow. As you go to the next page, this is where you'll see your results, and there's two parts to this that you want to look at. The strength of preference is referencing based on the situations described and the answers you provided. How does your particular style show up? What are the preferences that you have independent of the circumstances for using a style? So in this case, the bridging style was as high as 14, which shows it's clearly a dominant style. This particular survey also shows a secondary style with a moderately high level of responses at 9. Asserting style is slightly lower than that, and then really a less of a reliance on inspiring or negotiating. These are slight occurrences. Doesn't show anything as underutilized, but certainly points to inspiring and negotiating being fairly uncommon in this person's particular preferences. Doesn't mean that they're incapable of doing it. When we look at the instrument below, or the description below, what you're seeing here is there's a couple of, in this spider diagram, a couple of lines that are bolder than others. This is the normative data. This says, based on their particular database, how many people will have this number of answers in what quantity. So each dark bolded line represents the 25th percentile. So this is 25th, 50th, 75th percentile. So in this case, you look, the bridging style preference is in the 75th percentile. So it's fairly strong preference here. Over here, again, asserting again to the 75th percentile. Over here, a little bit higher than the 25th percentile, and below the 25th percentile against the normative data, and then for negotiating about the 50th percentile in terms of the number of people who would have had this level of strength. If you go to the next page, it begins to describe each of the preferences, the preferred styles, rationalizing in this case, and the value of the style, when to use it best, when's it effective, and what does it look like when it's ineffective. You'll see that for each of them. Asserting, the same thing. Negotiating, again, the same territory. And inspiring as well. And finally, it concludes with bridging. So take your time, read through those. We can have more of a conversation about it in the discussion forums. Here's a little bit more into the discussion about what does it look like when you look at the orientation that you have. And the orientation that they're suggesting is that when you combine the two scores in any one of the two areas, so for uniting it would be combining inspiring and bridging, and rationalizing it would be combining, advocating would be combining rationalizing and asserting. In either of those cases, where you get a score of 25 or higher, this is not only a style, but a strong influence orientation. What does that really mean? It means that you rely, if it's advocating, you rely heavily on pushing onto others your point of view, your perspective, in order to influence them, your reason, your logic. Uniting, if uniting is higher than 25, that points to you, when you combine inspiring and bridging, if that score is higher than 25, that'll point to you relying heavily on the uniting orientation, in which your orientation is to draw people towards you, oftentimes through deep inquiry, attempts to understand, attempts to connect with people, and to the extent that you do, using inspiring language for what can be possible. So take a look at that and see if that tells you something. And then there's tips for us all to become more effective in each of the styles. So as you look at a style that's a strength, it begins to tell you what you can do to enhance the qualities that you've got. Even if you look at it as in terms of a weakness, you can consider what could you do to enhance a particular style that you are lacking in. And again, developing underutilized style will help you to think about that. A couple of pages in that regard. And that wraps it up. So take a look at your influence style instrument and let's talk about it in the discussion forum.